right. Good morning, my fellow commissioners and staff, and good morning to those in the public and those who will be joining us on Zoom. I would like to call this meeting to order at 9:06, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And can we get a verification of legal notice? Well,
Legal notice has been sent out.
well, since we had a continuation, so. I don't see any consent agenda. So we will move into public input. Any person may speak for 3 minutes about any subject of concern, provided that it is within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission and is not already on today's agenda or schedule for future public hearing. Speakers are requested to legibly write your name on the sign-in sheet on the podium and state your name for the record. Okay.
Somebody in the Zoom room, can you please state your first and last name, and then you can speak?
What was her name?
There isn't one, it's a phone number.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to say the phone number.
Yeah.
Are you waiting for me to speak?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so very much. This is Bart Levinson. I am a Valley Fire survivor, but I lost my home and my entire neighborhood was lost. Several months ago, the fire chiefs went before the Board of Supervisors to tell them of their concerns that this draft ordinance, that these structures were
Excuse me.
not yet enough.
We're not on that timed item yet. This is regarding anything that's not in today's agenda, but you're welcome to state your comments once we do open the item. That's
Thank
for
you.
today. Thank you. Seeing that there's no hands in the chambers or on Zoom, we will begin our timed item for 9:05. Public hearing consideration of request for recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on draft ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 5 through 6, Article 1, Section 5 through 6, 6.24, exempt agriculture structures, and adding Chapter 5, Section 5 through 6, 6.25, temporary ag structures of the zoning ordinance of the County of Lake in regards to agricultural structures. This was continued from March 2023. So do we have a staff report or?
We will have, sorry, is my mic on?
No.
No.
All right, can you hear me now? We will have our director, Maria Turner, presenting this item in the Zoom room.
Okay.
She's not in there.
Is she maybe waiting to get let in, possibly, in the waiting room? No?
She's having trouble joining the meeting.
Is she trying to connect with the camera? Maybe we could just do her voice, you know?
What number she's calling in on?
I do not.
6205 or 3442?
Well, let me see if that might be her.
Otherwise, I'm not seeing them.
344-2 adjourned. She's on, I've asked her to unmute.
Okay.
There she goes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Maria. We can hear you.
Oh, thank goodness. Sorry, I tried my computer, my laptop, my phone, and now I just decided to call in. All right, so thank you. So the item you have before you today is started as a resolution of intent that was passed by the supervisors in September of last year. The point of the resolution, or the anticipated amendments to the zoning ordinance.
Good morning, Maria. We can hear you.
Uh-oh. Oh, thank goodness. Sorry,
There's a
I
delay.
tried my computer, my laptop, my phone, and now I just decided to call in. Just a second. I just muted that. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so as I was saying, this ordinance relates to agriculture-related structures, but it's specific to cannabis. The point of which being enabling the cannabis industry, our permitted cannabis industry, to have greater access to the structures that will enable them to operate efficiently. So the pathway for agency and task force and public review started right after that by going to the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force. It spent a few meetings there and then went to the Ag Advisory Board. Got a couple more recommendations there, and now it is before you in a notice public hearing. Next week, it's going to go to the Board of Supervisors in, again, another noticed public hearing. That way, we're maximizing our opportunities for public input as well as agency and deciding body review. I'm going to use Resolution 2022-122, their actual resolution of intent, as sort of the framework as we go through the recommendations that came from the various bodies. So if you'd like to use that as reference, it should follow right along.
People on Zoom are getting a really bad echo.
Bad echo from me?
Maria, we got a comment saying that on Zoom they're getting a really bad echo.
Okay, I just muted my computer. Are you still getting an echo?
Let me check. Yeah, she's asking.
All right, I just took my phone off speakerphone. Perhaps that is helpful. Let me know if this is still echoing.
Yeah, it sounds better here too.
Super duper. All right, we'll go this way.
Okay.
I gotta love technology. Okie dokie. So anyway, the amendments to the zoning ordinance are, of course, in Chapter 21. However, in addition, there are going to be a couple amendments to Chapter 5, which is where our agricultural exempt structures is housed. So if you take a look at the resolution of intent, recommendations from the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force included, first of all, we dealt with the ag exempt structures. Everyone there was comfortable with the existing definition of ag exempt structures, which is limiting it to storage of animal feed or farming implements, things like that, supplies. It's not meant to be a location of employees staying there doing working, so it would not be appropriate for, say, like a processing structure. But the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force was supportive in allowing cannabis permittees to access or have opportunities to apply for the ag exempt structures. Previously, that was denied to them because cannabis was not considered the agricultural product. So since the state and the Board of Supervisors both recognized cannabis as an agricultural product, this is sort of bringing it kind of up to date. And so all of our agricultural products and those farmers will be treated the same to allow them the access to the ag exempt structures. And so that task force wanted to keep the definition and the criteria of ag exempt structures the same, but allow cannabis permittees to have access to them. The next one, in section 6.25, for temporary agricultural structures, the task force found the title confusing, and so they recommended that we change it to temporary hoops for cultivation. They also wanted wording to show that these temporary hoops for cultivation would be exempt from building permits if they met certain criteria. And then also wanted to specify the method of anchoring the temporary hoops for the cultivation into the ground. So we're going to amend, if this part is approved, we're going to amend a section on our use permit application to make sure we're getting that information.
Maria?
Now, that data is important. Yes?
This is Commissioner Hess. I'm just curious about why the language would be changed so specifically to temporary hoops when shipping containers, for example, are also in the equation.
I think that comes in a later section.
But why is
And
that?
we were going to change.
But why is that
Well, because
being changed? The title.
yeah, because temporary ag structures is a broad term. But then if you go down into section 3, they recommended we change that to be specific to temporary structures for cannabis drying, versus the hoop houses. Or the temporary hoops for cultivation. That's where we're growing the plants. So they're just adding a little more clarification,
And may I make
keeping
a comment?
keeping it less broad.
Sure, of course.
Hi, this is Andrew Amelong, the Cannabis Program Manager. Also, are you hearing me? Yeah. Also, the original term had temporary agricultural exempt structures, and these wouldn't be exempt for agricultural purposes. So
Thanks.
Good, thank you. Okay, so the method of anchoring the temporary hoops for cultivation is important for our building division to have a level of comfort that these hoops aren't just going to go blowing around the hills. And then also our use permit application information would be helpful, because when the project goes out for review, specifically for tribal review, they really want to know what level of ground disturbance we're talking about. Okay. Great. Another priority of the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force was making sure that the fire codes, that the emergency personnel and our fire responders would have access to the structures. However, agricultural structures do have a level of exemption given to them for drying structures, and so to keep everything consistent with across all agricultural products, the require of conformance for the Public Resource Code 4290 and 4291 was specifically, the task force recommended that we make sure that we recognize this as an agricultural product, because there are certain exemptions for ag products and their structures. The next one, requiring the generator rules. Now, we have criteria and regulations for generators elsewhere in cannabis policy that only allows them for certain emergencies. This would change that a little bit, and the task force felt more comfortable if we could deal with generators on a more holistic level, so that it would deal across the board and not just in specifics to the ag-related structures or anything that's in this ordinance, the tents, the ag exempt structures, things like that. So, let's see.
Maria, could you unwrap that a little bit? What do you mean by holistic?
Thank you. I didn't understand that reference either.
Sure. Okay. So the task force thought it would be a good idea if, instead of just having certain allowances for generators within this specific ordinance, that it be dealt with for other options as well. Because right now, generators are allowed only on an emergency basis. But this ordinance allows them for a longer period of time, but only specific to these certain uses. And so the task force was recommending that we actually take a look at the generators overall through the whole cannabis policy, rather than just specific to this to these certain structures. There's a 6-second lapse between what I see you doing and what I'm saying, so I can't tell if you're nodding or not. So feel free to just jump in verbally if you have further questions.
Maria,
I'm watching
Maria,
you.
it's Commissioner
Yes.
Hessigan. I honestly don't understand that explanation. How is this addressing something more generally across the board about
The recommendation, no, this one, this would actually just not be dealt with in this ordinance. They're recommending that we just bypass this part of the ordinance so that we can take a look at it in relation to all the areas where generators are mentioned in cannabis regulation.
Can I follow up on that? It also applies to the fact that, this is an ag exempt and temporary ag structure resolution that was sent to the task force from the Board of Supervisors. It came after they sent the issue of early activation to the task force. And then right as we were wrapping this one, they sent the retail sales issue to the task force. So it's been a struggle for the task force to approach a holistic cannabis ordinance, zoom out and see the big picture, because we've kind of been busy with these, one-off topics. So that's kind of what the task force meant by that, so.
Yeah, so it's, Maria, this is Miley. It's a little confusing to me because of the double negatives. So I'm reading Section 3 exemptions. 1, agricultural buildings requiring an exempt building permit that are not connected to a power source. So those would be exempt from this amendment.
Thank you. Ag exempt structures do not require building permits so long as they have no utilities, no electricity. If they wanted electricity, it's possible, but they would need an electrical permit for that. That would not be exempt.
Okay, so am I correct in understanding that today you're asking us to not consider the issue of expanding generator use?
Precisely.
Got it, thank you.
That was the recommendation of the task force.
But isn't the permitting of any generator use not in an emergency situation expanding the definition of generator use?
Yes. So so I could have clarified that then by saying we just recommend, or the task force recommends that this part of the ordinance be removed.
Okay,
so that it could be considered in the future by the task force more across the board with cannabis policy.
Okay, so am I understanding that you're requesting that we remove Section 3?
That would be consistent with my understanding of the recommendations of the task force.
Okay, great.
And the wording would be more clear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so going on, we had just another recommendation for additional clarification in our application regarding DCC guidelines for the temporary hoops for cultivation. I'll let Andrew speak to that. I'm pretty sure that that is because there are new laws from the state regarding the allowance of using hoops for outdoor recreation. But Andrew, if you have a different understanding, feel free to jump in right there.
Yeah, that is correct. The Department of Cannabis Control updated their regulations, and they went into effect January 1st, 2023. And with their definitions for outdoor cultivation, they removed the restrictions on hoops and light deprivation. So they basically opened up the path for hoop houses to be used in outdoor cultivation, which would allow an outdoor cultivator to get 2 or 3 harvests a year instead of 1. So
Extending the season.
So yes, so while they've opened up that, they also opened up a limited amount of electrical use for those hoop houses. However, I believe the task force did not decide to go down that road. So. But the general proposal is that these hoops would be allowed through a temporary building permit that would come through our department. Should they meet the requirements, they submit a plan, we can determine if they meet the confines as defined by our chief building official, Bill Collins, they would not necessarily need a building permit. However, if, their designs, their specific designs, went outside of those defined, metrics, then it would require a building permit. And I believe it was for around 180 days. They would have to then dismantle the structures.
Are you ready for our comments?
Are we ready for me to go to the next?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So no comments regarding hoop houses. We'll skip that part. Then now regarding the tents, during the task force meeting, staff let them know that we have encountered issues out in the field where the tent structure is getting doubled as also a load-bearing structure for the actual product drying. This is very problematic since it's not designed to carry anything more than really just the tent sheeting. And so we requested that there be a rule added that if you're going to use your tents for drying, you need to have a load-bearing structure within that tent that can actually bear the weight of the product for the safety of everybody who's in there. So that's why that is added. Shipping containers. These shipping containers are used sometimes for drying. They're also used for storage. And so it's taking a little longer, or it's taking longer now for permittees, and this actually is not limited to cannabis, but for people requesting electrical power to be able to get it. And so the structures that one would normally build with power to use for drying are taking longer to get built as well. And so the request to bring in the shipping containers as an agricultural accessory use to be used with also as possible drying sheds, they requested an extension on that time to 3 years. Now, the period of time, the extended period of time is taking for people to get their electricity is not just anecdotal on our cannabis permittee side. We actually had a very interesting meeting, staff did, with PG&E personnel to go over the process for getting power out to these more remote areas. And it definitely backed up what we were hearing at the task force as far as experience from our permittees. Let's see. Okay, and then next, the size, the limit of total square footage for those temporary cannabis drying structures. The task force recommended that they set it at a 10% of the project's total canopy area. Now, I was actually expecting questions about that percentage, but if there are none, we'll continue.
Maria, this is John. Could I ask a different question?
Sure,
I don't know
okay.
if it's just a typo or a cut and paste issue, but when you were talking about shipping containers, that section ends with shipping containers shall be temporarily allowed for a maximum of 60 days, et cetera. And then under general purpose tent, that section ends with the language about a shipping container. Shouldn't that instead refer to a tent there?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Andrew, if you make note of that one, we'll definitely get that checked out. Thank you. So there were a couple additional recommendations that came out of the task force meetings that are not included in the ordinance, but they felt that they were priorities and wanted to pass it on to the board for their consideration. One of those was making sure that when emergency personnel is responding to a cultivation site, that they can find an accurate site plan easily when they get to that site. And so there was discussion about some Knox boxes, which are those boxes at the gates that emergency personnel uses to access the property. Some of those are large enough that they could hold site plans there, but not all of them. And so the task force recommended that the site plan either be kept right there in those Knox boxes if they're large enough, or be kept in some easily accessible space on site, and the location of those site plans be communicated and kept updated with the local fire personnel. So when people are responding to an emergency, they can get a quick map and know where they're going. But also, if those site plans, like, you don't really want a big old sign, you know, like the mall, like when you come in here, you are here, and over there is Spencer's or wherever you're going. They didn't want that because that could compromise security. And so that's why they want the site plans in a place that's not necessarily visible to the public, but accessible in an emergency. And then also, it was not clear enough that the issuance of the permits for these specifically remain with community development, and so they just asked that that be clarified. So after those meetings from the task force, those recommendations and the resolution of intent were carried forward over to the Ag Advisory Board for Ag Advisory Committee, for their recommendations. So they agreed through their discussion. They liked number 1, which was the allowance of ag exempt structures to cannabis permittees, and they also liked number 13, which was the site plan location and communication with the fire emergency personnel.
But
One thing that
does
they
that mean
wanted
that
to
they
convey-
opposed numbers 2 through?
No. They just didn't have anything to really say about them.
Really?
They didn't go through it line by line like we did. Yeah, they kind of had a little more informal of a discussion, and so the consensus that they did have was built around those. And in fact, a lot of the discussion really focused on the processing of ag exempt permits. So nothing really policy related about that. But then they also really liked the focus on the public safety. But no, they had nothing to say about any of the other ones.
Thanks.
My pleasure. And so now this comes before you, Planning Commission, for your recommendations. And after next week, as I said, your recommendations will be added to the staff report and presented to the Board of Supervisors for their consideration. This ends my presentation. I am happy to take any questions.
I have a quick question. Maria, this is Miley. Are you looking for a formal motion here, or would you just like to hear our comments?
I would appreciate it. Since we don't do a comment by comment reliance to the board in our minutes, a consensus by motion of the Planning Commission would be extremely helpful for clarity for the board.
Hi, Maria. I have a question regarding number 12, the one that we didn't have questions on earlier, limiting the total square footage of temporary cannabis drying structures to 10% of the project's total canopy area. How was that number generated, the 10%? And was it considered enough to efficiently operate, an operation that would 10% be enough or comfortable? Or was there another number that was brought up, but 10 was used to kind of keep the number of shipping containers or hoop houses, storage sheds, drying storage sheds that an operation could have?
Thank you, Chair. That's a good question. Rolling through the resolution right now really quick.
Maria,
The amount, can you hear me?
yes, I was just going to say I could speak to that.
Oh, go right ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, when this resolution before it came to the task force, when it was being reviewed or drafted at that point, the board had asked staff to look into what the approximate amount, the ratio between processing facility versus cultivation, what that common ratio was. And looking at a good handful of our projects, it was falling in at around 5%, actually. However, there are, especially if you're opening up, hoops and light deprivation for outdoor and the potential to have multiple drying seasons, there's potential need to have some extra space for that processing. And that's where the LCCA, I think, brought in a recommendation to move that upwards of 10%, which should be more than enough for anyone's needs.
And it could potentially also be used for, like you said, storage of other equipment or whatever they might need, right?
No, those would be the ag exempt structures.
Oh, okay.
They're limited to, it's a place to park your tractor or keep your supplies. You're not supposed to be in there working. But with a processing facility, a drying facility, there will be employees in there working and drying, so.
Well, employees would have to be in the hoop houses as well.
Correct. And they would not be ag exempt, but potentially exempt from a building permit. The reason why the chief building official came up with the parameters of the proposed hoops, limiting to like 12 foot in height and a material that wouldn't, basically, should any of these hoops come down, they wouldn't cause any damage or any loss of life. They shouldn't result in any serious injury, and the limitation on the length would allow easier access should there be a medical emergency to get out of the hoop.
Thank you.
My next question was regarding the whole electrical to these structures and the use of generators for those structures. How is the reason for the generators to avoid having to take out a building permit to run electrical to these structures? Was that the reason for the generator language on this draft?
I think that was where it was coming from, with the understanding that these structures are not permanent, and so would just be used on a temporary basis. And so the power supply would not be permanent drawing to them either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so where I kind of have an understanding is that before, or the ordinance that exists currently that allows it for emergency use only was for the pollution of noise and potential fire hazards caused by having generators and having to haul and transport fuel for these generators. So the only concern or conflict that I have with that is the potential for noise pollution and fire. And I know that is with the setbacks and the location of these generators would kind of avoid any or try to avoid some of the issues that could happen with generators, but mainly the noise pollution. Are they going to be running these generators all day with if they're having fans or dehumidifiers? So mainly the noise is my main concern for how many generators a certain project can have and what noise that's going to be causing, the constant buzzing like all day, 8 hours a day, or is it limited to certain hours? Yeah.
May I add on to that question? Marie, what's the rationale for the 50-foot setback for generators? Where did that come from and why?
I think that was in the original resolution of intent. So Supervisor Sabatier would be a much better person to answer that question. That was how it was handed to us. But to address generators in general, they do have the possibility for noise impacts, air quality, and fire danger.
Right.
Noise impacts can be mitigated by requiring the casing around the generators, which is what we have done for pretty much every building permit or for a generator that's not cannabis related either. And so the noise standards that we have in our existing ordinance would still apply. So that could help mitigate the noise. However, one of the considerations when dealing with generator policy is also to consider the air quality as well as the potential, the fuel storage, extra fuel storage, and potential for wildfire impacts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because to my understanding, whenever a project comes, when it's in the planning phase, either they have to have power by PG&E, which would reduce the use of having to have generators. They could just run, power from that drop that they have, or to avoid the whole generator use. So, but then, like I said, then that would not make these temporary or the extra, because you would need a building permit to run electrical to these. So it's I kind of see where the thought process came, to try to avoid having building permits to make the cost or to make these structures easier to have for these projects. So that's just kind of like my comment that I have for that.
While we're on the topic, I had a comment about that as well. I've been thinking about electricity and how that whole industry is changing right now. And solar photovoltaics are absolutely possible now. We're seeing more and more people who are completely off the grid. They have batteries, they can run all night. So I don't see why we should permit these really annoying, loud generators that pollute the air. That's my comment.
I'd like to associate myself with that comment, and I'd like, if there's some way staff could make a note about my question regarding the 50-foot setback and the rationale for that, so that the supervisors understand there was a question about that.
Yes, and I'd also like to point out that all of these projects are required to have a 100-foot setback. So when you have two conflicting regulations, you always go with the more conservative setback. So in a sense, that 50-foot setback will most likely not apply to these projects. And furthermore, a lot of these approved projects and our permittees have plans to be hooked up to PG&E. However, the hookup to PG&E is going into years out until they can get it. So they're intending to use these on a temporary basis, just during a certain period, about 2 months a year, for up to 2 years. I think we might have moved that to 3 years while they're waiting to get hooked up to PG&E.
But if the likely outcome is always going to conform to the 100-foot setback, why is there any discussion of a 50-foot setback?
Again, I think Maria was correct. It was just kind of left over from the original document. And you guys are free to discuss and recommend an increased setback, should you feel it necessary, given the impacts that these generators can potentially have.
I would like to have the commission consider that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
my
I just
comment.
wanted a clarification. When you said the more conservative, between a 50-foot setback and a 100-foot setback, you consider 100-foot the more conservative.
Correct.
Thanks.
Maria, I have a question regarding your comment about these are not permanent structures. And I get the concept, but the reality is you've got to remove these things, whether it's a hoop house, a tent, or a shipping container. And I question how realistic that requirement is, especially when it comes to moving shipping containers, because my gut tells me that this ordinance would actually proliferate the use of shipping containers, which I'm not a fan of on agricultural land to begin with. But how would that in reality work in terms of ensuring that all of these shipping containers on all of these properties were properly removed at the proper time? Is there staff available for that, or what would the implementation of that be?
I'm also very concerned about that.
No, I think those are valid points, definitely. I'm sorry, I'm down in Southern California at my friend's house right now, so I can't see who's attending the meeting, but I'm wondering if anyone from LCCA could give us like a walkthrough on what that would look like.
I can also speak to that, Maria. In fact, she's been out of town this week, but staff has had a discussion about this situation. So all of our permitted approved projects have an annual inspection, annual monitoring. So while they go in, and the building division can issue temporary building permits that often go along with demolition permits. So they'd get 2 permits to put these up and then take them down at the end of the season. We were discussing the fact that we really only do 1 annual inspection during the growing season to see the operation. Would we need to require a second site visit and inspection towards the end of the season to ensure that these have been adequately dismantled for that year? And at what point do we add that to the annual inspection fee? But I think the suggestion, and again, it wasn't in writing, it's just a discussion we're having, was to see if we could incorporate that second inspection fee into the temporary building permit fee when they come and apply in the first place, because we don't anticipate all of our permittees pursuing these. So
You use the term dismantling as opposed to removing.
removing, dismantling,
I-
removing. Depending on-
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but I'm reading item 10 here. The ground floor of an agricultural building shall be on grade and must be concrete, dirt, or asphalt concrete. I have a huge issue with that. That takes it out of ag use. It's no longer arable land if you do that. Also, I don't think it's reasonable to expect somebody to remove concrete. Okay, so this is repeated in Section 1, Item 10. I'm a little confused because there's a section on tents and a section on hoop houses.
So to clarify that, I believe that first section is for ag exempt structures. Those ag exempt structures are going to be permanent structures, as opposed to a
But it
container.
also does say in general purpose tents, it does say that it on grade must be on concrete, dirt, or asphalt concrete. Should the planning commission have consensus on that and make a motion, you could just modify that they be on dirt.
Well, I think that they may need some wooden flooring or something. I'm just thinking about, from an ag perspective, you're trying to grow something, you're going to get weeds. But I would just remove concrete and just say,
And asphaltic concrete?
I would just change it to read, must not be concrete or asphalt concrete, or other permanent substance that will prevent the land's future use as productive agricultural soil. That way it leaves it open for wood or any of those other weird products that are out on the market now.
I think that's reasonable. That's my response.
We could amend that.
Your recommendations are your recommendations. So I'm keeping track. Right now I've got two, but so far, okay, so I hear kind of two commissioners. It'd be helpful if somebody say they third, that we've got a consensus. But I've marked so far that that you would like to clarify the 100-foot standard as a setback for generators, as well as removing the concrete or asphaltic concrete requirements for both hoop houses and temporary drying structures like the tents, but not necessarily the ag exempt structures. Is that correct?
Yeah. And Director Turner, this is
Okay.
Commissioner Price, and I'm in consensus with my colleagues.
Me too.
Thank you.
So is Miley.
Okay. No, there's definitely consensus. Okay. Excellent. Good. Okay. Then I'm just keeping track of the list of possible recommendations so that I think we can combine it into a single vote if Deputy County Counsel Nichols is amenable to that. So I'm just saving them up. Let's keep going.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any further questions.
I had one more question regarding temporary hoops for cultivation, which was changed from temporary ag structures. Regarding tribal review for ground disturbance, I'm just wondering how or what that would look like. I'm sure that when a project decides to put a temporary structure and they have to do some grading if it's on a hill, to kind of limit these structures to flatter areas on the property that would require minimal ground disturbance. And I'm sure it's in the ordinance that if they will be doing any grading at all, that tribal monitors are there present for any ground disturbance when clearing for a temporary hoop house for cultivation.
We do not have the authority to require that a tribal monitor be on site. We can recommend it, but we can't require that they go into that the permittee enters into a contract. Since
Maria?
that's outside of our purview. Go ahead.
This is Nicole. Commissioner, are you asking that the ordinance require a monitor?
I'm just curious as to what the review, the tribal review process is for these, like if that's part of it or what,
Generally, the tribal review occurs under AB 52, which is associated with CEQA. If the structures if you're recommending that these structures be ministerially approved or exempt under a statutory exemption, then the CEQA criteria are never even applied, will not be applied. So if you're concerned about ground disturbance, then you might consider language in the ordinance that requires review of structures, that they no longer meet the definition of temporary if they require ground disturbance, and then they would trigger a permit review, further permit review, and then CEQA would be triggered, and then there would be then the project would be placed within the AB 52 consultation process.
that sounds good, yeah.
Yes, and to address Maria's point on tribal monitors, your commission can, as a mitigation, should the record support such mitigation, adopt a requirement or a mitigation that monitors be present during ground disturbance. However, what we cannot do is build into a permit a requirement that the individual permittee enter into a specific contract with a third party. Mm-hmm. But you do have the option of tribal monitors as a mitigation.
Yeah, that wording sounds, or that's kind of what I was hoping to hear from that, so thank you.
I think the terminology we would want would be allow tribal monitors, right? Not require them.
Well, they're always allowed, presumably.
Are they? I mean, I wouldn't presume that.
Well, in the sense that outside of a property owner, a permittee can always work with a tribe for a tribe to be present for activity on a property. When it becomes an issue for the county, when the county is involved, is when certain permitting review is triggered. In this case, it would be the AB 52 criteria. The county currently does not have a programmatic EIR or a county-wide EIR that would apply to every project. So each project would be reviewed individually, provided that it triggers CEQA. If it doesn't, if it's exempt from CEQA, and ministerial projects are exempt from CEQA, so if these buildings, these temporary buildings are defined as ministerial, for example, they may not get to that level of review. So if your concern is ground disturbance, that it should be reviewed, or the volume, for example, of number of hoop houses with potentially attached generators to each. Like, for example, if you think that the 10% of canopy would potentially in some projects result in a massive number of hoop houses, then you might consider language that would restrict the number rather than the canopy volume, by canopy percentage, that you can, based on whether or not you think it might fit in an exemption of CEQA, or if a certain amount of temporary structures over a threshold, in your view, would trigger CEQA, or should trigger CEQA, or should be subject to CEQA review, you might create that threshold in the language, or recommend that the board create threshold in language, so that anything over a certain amount would have that review.
Okay, thank you. I think I
Additionally,
go ahead.
Additionally, if I could just add to that, we have a separate evaluation criteria for our grading permits. So ground disturbance would not be ministerial necessarily. If the permittee is requesting, to cut into a hill or something like that to do these structures, that would also be evaluated. It would not necessarily just be over the counter. And so that is where the increased levels of review and analysis and CEQA come into it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to get at, that if, you had to go and do massive grading to put temporary structures, that it wouldn't, that shouldn't be allowed, without having a tribe there monitoring that. But if there's minimal grading or no grading at all, then I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, what I was going to say was, if we remove concrete, then we are affecting that, I don't know where it is here, the way the buildings are attached and.
Anchored, I think the word was anchored.
Thank you. So I think our two choices for anchoring buildings was to put some kind of structure 12 inches under.
Right.
So I don't feel comfortable evaluating whether that is going to disturb ancient remains or something. I would request that the Board of Supervisors consult the tribes on this issue if it's not covered by a grading permit or something. That's all.
Well, and apropos Council's comments about canopy, we did get a green sheet from some Clear Lake residents, and I don't know if this is an accurate way to refer to it, but some comment or response would be appreciated. The current recommendation increases the drying square footage for 5 to 10%, as we all know. 10% of this would be 1.6 million square feet of temporary drying. As one 20-foot shipping container measures 160 square feet, this factors to 10,000 containers with an unknown number of generators. And that's probably an extreme example, but how many hoop houses or any structure are we actually, contemplating here?
This conversation did come up in the task force, and as you may know, we also have Robert Geary on the task force from Habimil-Topomo of Upper Lake. And we came to the conclusion, because the discussion, I guess, got a little tricky to try to determine what a predefined structure in this sense would be that would not trigger necessarily a building permit or a new use permit. And the conclusion was to kind of open up a path for that, but to have staff review each update and modification and determine whether that constituted an amendment, which there was some confusions about amendments. When you are amending your project, you're going beyond the environmental impacts that were approved. We require you to come in and you have to apply for an amendment to the use permit. It goes through CEQA and it comes to the Planning Commission again. So any extreme example like the one mentioned in the letter it would be easy to take a look at that for staff and determine this is going to be an environmental impact and it can't go this route. So
I'm reassured.
Okay.
If I could also add one thing about CEQA and tribal notification. Last year, while working with Robert Geary and the tribes to understand their concerns regarding ground disturbance on any given project, that year we were focusing on shoreline projects. We modified our questionnaire to add in a bunch of questions that would help the tribes on a case-by-case basis more easily assess whether they were interested or concerned about the impact. And so that is part of now our standard application, with the concern that the last thing we want is to bypass the tribes or, not allow them the information that they need in order to make an accurate assessment about going forward.
Do we open it for public comment? Do we get to hear from the public?
Yeah.
All right, we'll be opening public comment. Or did you have
I
something?
can say something else later.
Okay, really quickly. Wait, you said yes?
I'm sorry, I thought you wanted to
Oh, no.
open public comment first, but no, I have I'm looking at the public comments from concerned citizen. This person says, mainly because temperature and humidity control are the main drivers of both storage and drive functions of these closed areas, which isn't a sentence, but perhaps the wording can be changed to be more specific to the types of mechanical systems allowed. such as mechanical installations are limited to air conditioning, dehumidification, and air moving units that are standalone and plug-in. No permanently fixed HVAC systems used except for odor control. And upon prior approval of the community development director, no propane or natural gas used. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. I'm wondering if you saw it and had comments?
I guess I would leave it for discussion amongst the planning commissioners. I believe
Yeah, I
that was a late comment that came in just
Yeah,
within the last couple of days. So the task force did not review it, so.
Yeah, I think that it merits review by the task force. I'm not familiar with what their needs are, so I don't feel comfortable making a decision, but the point has been brought up, and I think,
We do have Jennifer Smith with us. She's on the task force as well. She's the president of the Lake County Cannabis Alliance, and she may be able to comment on that.
Opening up public comment. Please state your first and last name.
Jennifer Smith. Can I reserve my public comment since we're talking about this? Cool. So there becomes a lot of confusion, I think, when we're talking about processing and drying. And there's this misconception that we're using big heat-driven drying equipment, when really what we are using is just dehumidification, air conditioners. What was the other thing in there? So really, we're just trying to control the environment and dehumidify it. So we aren't using any heat, and there becomes this misconstruction of, it's misconstrued that we're trying to like heat these temporary structures, and we're definitely not trying to do that. So when talking about equipment, I think that's probably where that's coming from. And I recognize that this is all in one discussion today, but there's three very clear and delineated topics in it, and so it was very difficult for the task force to get through it, and so we kind of set things aside for that, and really tackled each topic one at a time, which is probably why there's seems to be some cut and paste errors in there. But I'm here to answer any questions. I have a myriad of permanent structures, temporary structures, and ag exempt structures, and have experience with all three for permanent and temporary uses. So.
Are you familiar with that e-comment that provides more specific language?
Yeah, I think what they're asking for is for that type of equipment to be allowed in these temporary structures, in which case you would need power, and we, in the task force, agreed to align with the state in the generator language. But hearing now that there might be a more holistic approach to cannabis, and I think overall aligning the generator use with cannabis, all the regulations.
Are you comfortable with this more specific language that's proposed that the chairman,
Can you read it again?
that Commissioner Field rather read?
yeah, it comes from Concerned Citizen, April 12th, 2023 at 1 p.m. The prohibition on the installation of any mechanical systems in exempt ag buildings or shipping containers will effectively eliminate their efficacy as storage or dry sheds, mainly because temperature, well, so before we go any farther with that, is that what we're doing, prohibiting the installation of mechanical systems?
So
I thought it was just generators.
it goes to the permitting of it, right? So if you want to do those things, the task force said, then you need to take a more permanent route. And so we're being asked to allow ag exempt structures for the way in which ag exempt structures are currently used. So store your tractor, to store your product. If you need to therefore add in those electrical elements, then you have to go through the building process. Am I stating that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
And the ag exempt structures will not be used for drying.
Correct.
Got it, okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay,
Yeah, that's helpful.
okay.
Do we have anybody in the Zoom room that wishes to speak? Just be sure to state your
Hello,
first and
yes.
last name.
Hear me?
Tell her she needs
Can you hear me?
Just one moment, we have somebody in chambers. We'll get back to you.
Don
Thank you.
Van Pelt. My concern is, and it's been kind of clarified, is the setbacks going from 50 down to 50. But with that going back to 100, my experience from what I had that all you are pretty aware of is the noise that came from the hoop houses during the drying process that had huge fans going 24/7. 100 feet is not enough of a setback. We heard that a long time. And then I hear today that the state is going to allow maybe 2 harvests, but they can only do it for 2 months at a time. There's a lot of clarification that needs to be made before we can make another recommendation, because there's time frames. The amount of noise was horrific. And when they did their light deprivation, it lit up the whole valley. So are we going to say that they can grow for extended amount of time because they're going to do lights, so the neighborhoods have to suffer through that? There's a lot more to what's going on than what's being presented that's actually happened that needs to be looked at a little more thorough. Because the noise at 100 feet, we were at 900 feet. The noise level exceeded what the standards were, and they went all night long. And when you get variable winds, you get higher standards, you get a lot of voices. They went to the extent of turning on music to try and eliminate the noise. It only made it worse. So I think as a planning commission, you guys really need to understand that the footage, the noise that's going to be created, and somehow fix that so the community doesn't have to be exposed to it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Back to that person on Zoom.
Okay, I'm opening up the Zoom room for comment. I've asked Bart Levinson to unmute herself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Hello,
hear
can
you.
you hear me? Oh, thank you very much. This is Bart Levinson. 2 months ago, the fire chiefs went to the Board of Supervisors when this draft ordinance was first introduced. Their concerns were that it reduced their fire fees, and the current draft ordinance continues that reduction while it increases fire risk. It isn't, as they said, safe enough. On the day before Maria wrote her recommendation, in the task force meeting, the fire chiefs were not present. There was not a vote. There wasn't a roll call. The fire chiefs have not formally weighed in on this. This has been way too informal. Valley Fire was caused by a wrongly used extension cord from an outbuilding to a hot tub by a retired fire professional, I believe. 17,000 people were displaced, 1,300 homes lost, 5 people killed. This county never the same. This is playing with fire. This is being pushed through as a direction directly from the Board of Supervisors to their employees at the community development departments. They don't have a choice, but you, the commissioners, do. As you heard, it was only informally discussed with the agricultural department. This largely will shift the responsibility on the agricultural department. They don't have the time or staff for it. Jennifer Smith speaks to what sounds like smaller projects. Well, we have some of the largest projects in the state. Currently in Middletown, there is a Bar X project, 79 acres of canopy, right next door to another project with similar size canopy. There will be no inspection during growing season. CDD doesn't have the staff for that. As well, the ag exempt structures can by a twist, apply for permanent structure status, which would allow them to extend up to 10 years. This is within 50 feet of property lines, and that is in many residential neighborhoods. This is so not thought out enough, not safe enough. The fire chief said it, not safe enough. It can be. Why are the fire fees reduced? These kinds of structures will need more inspections.
You've made your three-minute time, but if you would like to wrap up your comments.
Yes, about grading, I want to make sure that the commissioners understand. Yesterday, on Tuesday in the Board of Supervisors, a road was allowed to be bulldozed that didn't trigger even a small grading permit. In the property next to mine, 5 acres was allowed to be completely bulldozed, flat, 5 acres near a pond of natural habitat without triggering a grading permit. There is something wrong with the grading permit system and really needs examination. The tribal members are not being respectfully treated. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anybody else in the Zoom room?
Oh, yes. I have unmuted Betsy Kahn.
Is she here?
Okay, if you can hear me, Betsy, you can unmute yourself. Okay, Aaron McCarrick.
Hello, Commissioners. Chair, thank you so much for taking this topic up today. And I would actually like to start. Nara Dalbaca is on the Cannabis Task Force, but she is in a something she couldn't get out of right now. So I just wanted to mention her comment really quickly. And she said that the task force has been meeting every other week the past few months. Thank you to Maria and Andrew for putting this on. It is involved stakeholders from the tribes, building, fire, community, ag, and cannabis. And each item on this was debated thoroughly and at length. And there even was a subcommittee that engaged the fire department, the Farm Bureau, Jennifer. I'm missing somebody, but there was a subcommittee about that. So that's Nara's comment. My comment tags on to that, which is I remember when the CDD director, Mary, she wanted a planning commissioner on the task force, and I thought it was great because it's just going and public comment that's happening that comes before the planning commission, and it's playing a game of catch up. So I know moving forward we will be much more engaged with making sure our commissioners are aware of what's going on. Dalbaca is in Hidden Valley, and she is on the Cannabis Task Force. So I think we're taking this up and debating is
Aaron,
I do.
we're losing you there a little bit.
Yep. Oh, let me go outside. Okay. So I just want to say thank you. I voiced my support for recommending this to the board. I thank you for taking the time and the debate that this topic deserves, because there is a lot of information going into it. And to speak on the tribe, I would love to be there in person, but I actually just got through with a meeting that was discussing the importance of tribal cultural resources. And we're still working to get formal training for the Lake County Cannabis Alliance from tribal historic preservation officers and telling us how it works. Me personally, in some of my projects, we're going to have a monitor anytime we do ground disturbance. And it's just a matter of educating and learning, just as we are educating the commission about our process and the cannabis growing and commercial business. We are also being educated on the tribal historic preservation and cultural resources. So I wanted to reassure the commission that we are being proactive on that. So thank you so much again for taking this up. I recommend this being pushed to the board, and anybody who has comments, there's the Cannabis Task Force every 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Any more hands in the Zoom room? Yeah, there's a lot. Okay.
The next hand would be Sarah Bodner.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Sarah Bodner, the Policy Director for LCCA. I want to put a little context on this conversation about why we're having it, and that we are now many years into having a cannabis program in Lake County without any legal way for any cultivators to store their tractor equipment with the same rights that other farmers have, to to dry the product that they grow on their farms within county lines, and to have a fully compliant operation because of the gap that this provides for a farmer. If you couldn't put your pears anywhere or process them in any way, you couldn't be a farmer. And I know the commission is well aware of this because you've had projects come before you this year for processing facilities. And the nature of the farming cycle is that bringing those processing facilities online will not even put a dent in the amount of raw material that comes off farms all at the same time every year. And we're heading into another growing season with hopefully some regulations we can put in place. And this has been a very long and thoughtful process. So I just want to say, I think a number of things have been taken out of context today. And there has been absolutely nothing informal about the task force's creation, the nominations and appointments, the intentionality of bringing different stakeholders to the table from across the spectrum within the community, members of the ag community, ag department, fire chiefs, community members. It's been a most formal process, compliant with the Brown Act, with a long series of meetings where everything has been, agendized and minutes have been taken. And on this particular issue, an ad hoc committee was actually formed that included the Farm Bureau, LCCA, and the fire chiefs to dig deeply into these recommendations. So opposite of informal, and it took a long time. This was complex. Jen mentioned that there were like 3 different sections to the ordinance. We talked about ag structures so that cannabis farmers can park their tractor somewhere. We talked about drying structures, and then we talked about a whole host of ancillary related recommendations, greenhouses, having access for fire trucks, all of it. And this was an enormous job that the task force did as volunteers. So I want to thank CDD for hosting these meetings, for moving the conversation forward, and all the task force members for participating, and to really appreciate all that went into this. I do have some concerns about some of the presentation today. I think some of the recommendations that the task force made were actually not presented correctly. And I hate to say this to you here today because we're heading into another season and we desperately need these rules in place so farmers can plan their operations. But, the greenhouse recommendations, I do not believe were presented correctly. And I think that it might be a good idea to take a small break at some point during this meeting and go back to those minutes, because my understanding is that we holistically adopted state compliance with the state's laws around, generators. If I said greenhouses, I meant generators, that we agreed to align with state law around generator use. And additionally, I think the setbacks rules were.
We've hit the 3-minute mark, so if you would like to wrap up your comment.
Yeah, the setback rules were a little bit distorted. There was a lot more thought that went into them. So I think that part was not well represented. And I think that if we could take a short break, it would be great if Jen could huddle up with CDD and also look at that 60-day limit on shipping containers, because I believe we also altered that because 60 days for a shipping container and then having to move it to distributor land is completely unreasonable. So that would be my request, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, the next person with their hand up in the Zoom room would be Autumn Carsey.
Hello, Commissioners and Chair. Thank you for bringing up this important topic. I would like to speak specifically to hoop
Could you state your first and
today.
last name, please?
Yes, my name is Autumn Carsey, and I have a farm and processing facility in the County of Lake. I also ran 2 acres of hoop houses in Santa Cruz, California in 2021. I'd like to just add some clarity around hoop houses because I think there's a lot of confusion as to what they actually are. So a hoop house's primary purpose is to moderately extend the growing season by keeping the crop a little warmer due to heat trapping in the roof. It reduces the risk of frost damage in the early spring as well as the late fall. In addition, the partial shade provided by the roof material reduces the rate of water loss from the plant referred to as transpiration. This means that hoop houses will help with water conservation with the potential for a 25% reduction in water use overall. There are university studies that back this number, which I'm happy to share with you all. Their passive and temporary nature makes them ideal for preserving the local natural resources and views. Hoop houses increase the quality of the overall value of the farmer's crop. And just to list some of the additional benefits, recycling of materials as the temporary structures are moved and set up multiple times as needed. To clarify, the skeleton frame should remain and the covering is removed, ensuring it is not creating an impervious surface during the winter months. No water runoff diversion in winter months due to hoop house coverings be removed for the season. It's improved worker environment due to shade while working on the crop. Significant reduction of water consumption, 25%, as I mentioned, as plants do not give up as much internal water through transpiration due to shade and cooler temperatures. It increases long-term property values because the structures can be easily removed with no environmental impact, reduce exposure for crop dust and airborne particulates. My recommendations today are to designate a hoop house as an entirely separate type of cultivation approach. It is unique and different from a greenhouse approach, making them ag exempt. Change the local standard to allow for the normal 12-foot height of hoop houses as a standard in other agricultural California counties. Create no separation between the structures as they share a common support system. There's been talk of putting a 10-foot separation between the structures, and it's counterintuitive to the process and makes them cost prohibitive for farmers to implement. Following the other California counties that have multiple acres of hoop houses and berry hoops, I think is a good thing to look at, as other counties have already created legislation around agricultural exempt hoop houses. We appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the discussion concerning the use of hoop houses in Lake County, and I look forward to the ongoing discussions of this topic to help create a successful program that will aid all residents and farmers across the region. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Before we move on to the next person, I just can't get this notion out of my head that what if there are 30 or 50 hoop houses and there are 50 generators attached to those hoop houses operating nonstop for 2 months at a time? That seems to be a real disruption. Would you like to comment on that, Jennifer?
Sure. Jennifer Smith. So I think this is where all of this gets confusing. When we're talking specifically about cultivation hoop houses, you're not going to see generators with those. And if we are using a hoop structure as a temporary dry structure, you may or may not see generators. You may see shoreline power with that. If there's a generator, it should be permitted, but you would see one generator for about 12 hoop houses, which is about 12,000 square feet. So, so that's where it gets confused. Autumn's very specifically and passionately talking about our cultivation hoops, in which case we would not be using generators.
But if you can maybe just answer, I'm understanding that we have to have these carbon filtration systems because of the odor, the terpenes that are produced by the plants. How do you do that without a generator?
So that would be in a drying situation.
No, I'm talking about growing.
Well, for cultivation, we're not required to have, that's if you have an enclosed indoor facility. These are hoop houses. This is outdoor cultivation.
I think you're referring to the requirements of the Farmland Protection Zone, in which case projects that fall within that Farmland Protection Zone are required to be within mixed light greenhouses with air filtration. But this does not apply to our outdoor growers elsewhere.
Okay,
And-
it's getting a little bit clearer, but.
Yeah, and some clarity on the generator conversation in Article 27, Section 13, subsection AT, then on page 27-119, we have prohibited activities, and as they read, for electric generators, the indoor or mixed-light cultivation of cannabis shall not rely on a personal gasoline, diesel, propane, or similar fuels powered generator as a primary source of power, shall only allow properly permitted, when applicable, generators for temporary use in the event of power outages or emergency that is beyond the permittee's control. So I think what has been pointed out to staff is that that language encompasses the indoor mixed light cultivation, which are.
Okay, thank you for
They're
that clarification.
basically using artificial light and would consume much more energy, whereas this would apply to outdoor cultivation, which is utilizing sunlight.
Okay.
Okay, then.
And I will say that this is being brought about because of a change at the state. Light deprivation is what we call it. It's light manipulation without light supplement is now being allowed on outdoor licenses, and the majority of the licenses in Lake County are outdoor licenses.
Maybe that makes
Clear
sense
as
for
mud.
hoop houses and cultivation, but a shipping container would be used for drying.
Correct.
A tent would be a canvas tent. And wouldn't generators be attached to those?
Only if somebody did not have permanent power. I can speak personally to the power situation. I applied for my three-phase power drop in October of 2019, and it just now got my estimate back from PG&E.
I'm really sympathetic to the challenges that growers face, but I'm concerned about a lot of generators making a lot of noise in the neighborhoods.
Understood. Maybe if, because this is how I think about it, I don't know if it helps or not. We're just creating the pathway. The rules for generators still apply. The rules for CEQA still apply. The rules for cultural oversight still apply. These are just the options you're given. And it's been, so on both sides of the container conversation, and also keep in mind, these are temporary solutions and they have to get to a permanent solution within 2 to 3 years. And I think we said 2 years and then actively showing that you are trying to get to that permanent building. I forgot what I was gonna say. A container is really only gonna be used for about 60 days as a dry structure. And then the other 10 months out of the year, it's really just storage. And some supervisors have said that, well, then go get a permit for that, what's it called, shipping container to be there, or move it every 60 days. I think moving it every 60 days causes more disturbance than anything. So we're just trying to, we want everybody out of drying in containers, right? So this is just a pathway to get us to the point where those buildings can get built.
Thank you. I was wondering if Andrew could confirm that. My understanding was that this is an attempt to kind of bypass the system so that CEQA doesn't apply.
I wouldn't go that far. Basically, it would allow a pathway for our cultivators to engage in a temporary solution that will allow them to get to the point to install their permanent processing facilities and hook up to permanent power, whether it be solar or whether it be PG&E. Whereas, outdoor cultivation was not mentioned with electrical generators. It's still on almost all of the conditions of approval for outdoor cultivators. Those conditions list language that does limit the generator use to emergency use only, which is why they want to revisit it, and that's why we are revisiting it and discussing it as a possible temporary solution.
Thank you.
Commissioners, if I may. It sounds as if your commission has a number of concerns about the either direct or indirect impacts of any of the activity that may be approved under this ordinance. CEQA does apply on occasion to ordinances, or the review of ordinances, or the adoption of ordinances, provided that they meet the definition of a project. If this is an overwhelming concern for you related to the proposed changes here, you could recommend that staff perform a CEQA review on the impacts of this ordinance and the adoption of this ordinance.
I think that's a great idea.
What would a time frame be on such a review?
I don't think staff can determine that at this point. You know, CEQA takes its own time, so it's more about adequately addressing every potential impact and doing the research to confirm that.
I have another question. We've had a number of public comments that have raised a number of questions for me. One of the commenters said that the ag community has been involved in this, and what I'm seeing is an ag advisory committee, I believe, reviewed this and made two recommendations, number 1 and number 13. She referred to the Farm Bureau. I'd like to point out that although we have an excellent Farm Bureau director in this county, Farm Bureau is not representative of all farmers. It's not a public organization. And I was wondering if you could just tell me how our county ag commissioner was involved in the process.
Our ag commissioner is on the task force.
Great, thank you.
I think I hijacked public input. I apologize.
All right, we're going to bring it back to public comment. So if there's any hands in the room.
The next hand I will call on will be Holly Harris.
Hi there, Holly Harris. Thank you for allowing me to comment on this. I do want to agree with what Sarah said before. This has been very, very confusing in the way it's been presented. It took me a couple of weeks of going through this staff report to understand what was going on. And I did mention that to Andrew and Maria last Saturday, but during the meetings, the Cannabis Alliance presented multi pages of suggestions. And the task force went through all that. So many of the suggestions that you're seeing here are based on that Cannabis Alliance document, particularly section number 3 about changing the title to temporary structures for cannabis drying, but you do not have that document. So that's why you aren't understanding some of these comments that are being made. We had asked to have this document written out. I'm hoping it will be written out by tomorrow before it gets to the Board of Supervisors so that it can go out to public comment. That's all I wanted to say on that. My second thing is that Andrew has called me 3 times in the past day and a half. What we did talk about and what the public's concerned about is that all of these structures that we're talking about are within the already approved project footprint. And he assured me that, yes, they would all be within that because these are already approved projects. And if there was any change to that or the setbacks, then they would be asking for a variance, and then it would have to go back to the Planning Commission for approval. And I just want to ask if that's true. Thank you.
Go for it.
Well, a couple of corrections. She mentioned a variance, but it would be an amendment to the use permit. If let's break this up because there are 4 basic sections within this draft resolution, or draft ordinance. So in terms of, like, let's say one of these temporary processing facilities, should they be locating those shipping containers or the tents? within the same footprint where their permanent structure was proposed and will be, then we do not see any significant change in the environmental impacts of that. However, as you brought up, the incorporation of generators does present a new potential environmental impact. So that would have to be assessed. However, if they're going to go outside of their footprint or, expand into areas outside of their cultivation area, that would have to be revisited. That would be considered an amendment to the use permit, which would have to undergo a CEQA review and then brought back to the Planning Commission. And with that, in that regard, as far as a CEQA environmental impact and the fact that there are 4 sections within this ordinance, it is an option to break them up as to which ones could move forward or which ones would require CEQA review, as mentioned by County Council.
Any more hands in the room?
Yes, we do have more hands. The next one, the name will be call-in user 1.
Ask them if they're there.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, for listening to this today. My name is Angela Amaral. A couple of things just listening to this. I had a couple questions regarding, I wonder if you guys are considering the aesthetics for the people countywide. Residents don't really want to see hoop houses all over the county, and I think we already know that. My next thing would be with regards to the comment regarding that hoop houses would reduce water loss and increase water conservation. Another thing that would reduce water loss would be to not use above ground pots, not using the smart pots and planting directly into the ground. I don't know of any other crop that is planted in pots above ground. The pots are not biodegradable. So that's that issue with the hoop houses and the water conservation. Going to Commissioner Hess' comment, asking Andrew about the annual inspection of the temporary structure removal. And Andrew stated that they would possibly add a second inspection for structure removal. If Andrew could clarify that staff is the county have sufficient staff at this point to conduct thorough inspections of all permitted sites? Because from what I understand, that some physical inspections weren't able to be conducted last year due to a lack of staff. And I guess my last thing would be to the planning commissioners, the confusion and the uncertainty that you guys are experiencing right now is the same that has been expressed by many people in the task force. It is confusing. It's moving very quickly, and we would just like to see it thought out a little bit more and a little bit more information provided. The meetings there are several meetings that got postponed, they were canceled, rescheduled due to noticing or different issues. And there's a lot more going on here, so maybe a postponement to allow for a more extensive review might be better. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to put my comments out there, and thank you guys for listening to everyone.
Sharon, can you repeat your name one more time, please?
Sure. Angela Amaral.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would suggest that we allow Andrew, as requested, to clarify about that.
Yes, to address that, it is mentioned quite often that there's not enough staff to do the inspections, and that has been the case in the past. I believe in 2020, the year before I came on board, we barely had the staff to do inspections at all. at that time. However, things are much better. In 2021, we did the majority of the inspections. This past year, with the dedicated cannabis program and coordination and cooperation with code enforcement, we completed all of our annual inspections. Some of them, we had several growers opt out of cultivating, so they weren't cultivating. A good number after that requested to reduce their cultivation size. And with the opt-outs in some of the more remote locations, we were able to utilize Planet Lab satellite imagery to go in and confirm that they were not cultivating on that for our outdoor cultivators where we could verify that. So, and currently this year compared to last year, we have more staff available to work on cannabis. So.
Any more speakers?
So we have Lori Pascarella.
Hi, yes, my name is Lori Pascarella. Thank you for the opportunity to address the commission. First, I'd like to commend the whole process and having a dedicated committee reviewing this and putting in such extensive efforts and looking at all angles on this, getting all the information, and reviewing it with key party members in the county, and making sure that the fire department, the ag department, all the players have been included in this process. I want to commend you because it is providing sustainability in agriculture for the county. It's a big employer for the county. What this resolution could do would be to allow a more sustainable approach for cannabis cultivation, for outdoor cannabis cultivation, particularly with the use of temporary hoop structures. There is unquestionable scientific data backing up all the information in terms of reduced water usage, less sunburning of plants, improved quality, less exposure to dust and other elements, providing a shaded environment. And as far as work, it is a logical, sustainable solution to improving the agricultural situation for cannabis operators doing outdoor cultivation. Also providing a pathway when people are dealing with 3 to 4 to 5 year processes and working with PG&E to try to bring power to their location, you must have an alternate pathway available. And so I think that having temporary use of generators is a key solution. These are able to be done in a manner that is within the noise ordinance, and the decibels can be measured and confirmed within the noise ordinance. So I think some of the complaints that are being brought up in terms of that are a little excessive by community members. And I think overall you need to look at what it is as far as the viability to the county as an overall industry and economic growth for the county, et cetera, and continue your path forward with your consistent meetings, your review involving all the parties and creating a positive path forward for the industry, as well as meeting all the requirements and satisfying community members. So I commend you all on that, and I hope to see that this will move forward to the Board of Supervisors for a vote soon. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
May I speak, please?
Who's that? Yes,
This
go
is
ahead.
Bart Levinson. May I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
You've already had your comment, lady.
Yes, well, there have been some things brought up since. As you've seen, you just had a demonstration of the direct link between the Cannabis Alliance and the CDD and the task force. The meeting that was portrayed to you with the Ag Department and the Cannabis Alliance and the Fire Department was a meeting attended by a fire marshal from Kelseyville who said that the recommendations were never completed. A report was not generated from that meeting. And in fact, that meeting was non-Brown Act compliant. It was somehow given permission to be held away from the county, away from the public eye. I'm very concerned with over and over again what we see is a direct link from the Cannabis Alliance and their wish lists. They submitted, and if you look in the minutes for the task force, you will see it says that Lake County Cannabis Alliance submitted its wish list and we agreed to it. There is way too much of that going on. This is playing with fire. Valley Fire was started by a wrongly used extension cord. This is fantasy that this isn't going to put all of us at much greater fire risk. The fire chiefs, please ask them. They tell me they are understaffed, under-equipped, and underfunded. They don't have the ability to keep expanding every time we create a more flammable situation. Please, let Lake County grow this industry responsibly, correctly, and fiscally supportable. The cannabis industry has tanked in California. This isn't something Lake County can fix. It is statewide. The prices have bottomed out. If you read professional journals, you will see that it is statewide and is not expected to come back. In fact, an article
Excuse me,
today...
can we leave the comments with the item that we're discussing and not vary to different issues that we're not discussing today, please?
Thank you. And I'd just like to ask you all, just as human to human, maybe your house wasn't burned down in one of our giant fires. Many people were. 65% of this county burned. We cannot knowingly put ourselves...
Excuse me, you made these comments regarding fires already. If there's any new information, we'd love to hear it, but we do have other people, and your 3 minutes have expired as well. So we'll be moving on to the next. We'll be moving on to the next speaker. Any more speakers? Okay. We'll be going back to chambers if there's any more further comments in chambers.
Jennifer Smith, Lake County Cannabis Alliance, as well as a licensed cultivator in the county. To address something really quickly, there were subsequent meetings after the meeting referenced, and the fire marshals and the fire departments very clearly signed off on these recommendations that are coming from the entire task force. There was a subcommittee that was made up of myself, the Farm Bureau, and the fire department to make sure that we got this right and had everybody's approval. What you are seeing in front of you was approved by the entire task force, not just the Lake County Cannabis Alliance. It was brought up that we should put our suggestions first, seeing that we are the cultivators and know what is needed, and then they were discussed in the task force. Very open environment in which everybody in the county was notified appropriately and allowed to participate in. Couple things, I don't even know where to go back to. Again, I think what's important is that we're just really trying to create that pathway and give the options and not subvert any noise or pollution regulations that are already in place. These are just options for a stopgap situation that's been created by just the developing of the industry, as well as the way the process has been throughout here in Lake County. So we're asking for these, let's start at the beginning. There's 3 sections, right? So we're asking to be able to use ag exempt structures in the way ag exempt structures are currently allowed for all crops. We're asking for cultivation hoops to be used in accordance with the new state regulations. Those would be temporary in nature and would again follow any rules that are already overarching in the regulations, whether it be for cannabis or other crops. And the third part is for the use of temporary structures, a 2 to 3 year time frame, so that we can get into compliance with permanent buildings that have gone through the entire building process. So those are the 3 sections. We've given options. We've explained number 1 and number 2, and we've given several options to be used for that third part, that critical drying process. And what's essential about that is This is the third time this has gone through this cycle. This isn't something that we've rushed into. This has been the first topic that the Board of Supervisors wanted us to tackle in the task force, and I think we had at least 6 meetings on this topic. What's important is that here in Lake County that we're able to finish the entire agricultural process of these crops, that we're able to grow, harvest, process, and then maintain these crops. Otherwise, I mean, nobody's growing wine grapes and letting it just, fall off the vine, or harvest them and then have nothing to do with them. So we're just asking to complete that cycle with the ramp up to, getting to permanent structures. I think I've talked a lot today, but obviously very in support of this and always open to questions. Thanks.
Thank you. And if there's no further questions on Zoom as well, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission.
I have a question. Probably Andrew would be able to answer this. One of the commenters talked about the aesthetics of hoop houses. I'm not opposed to well-maintained hoop houses, but we have a problem in this county with hoop houses that are disintegrating and blowing in the wind. Has this been discussed at any of these meetings? Have we come up with any solutions?
Yes, that's, it was determined that, again, that our department, that staff would like to look at each one of these proposals as each cultivator makes that proposal to address their issue and pretty much look at them on an individual basis. And some may qualify. No environmental impacts, it's within these confines, it's not viewable. We can take a look at it and compare it to each category of CEQA and each impact that it could have, and also compare it with the approved project and the scope of that approved project and how it relates to that scope. Some will qualify. Others will potentially have to go through a minor or major use permit or amendment to use permit. I wouldn't want to lump every outdoor operation that's been approved and say that this ordinance is going to open the doors for them to do it. It will open the doors for some of them.
So I guess my question, I should state it more clearly, is when a hoop house that has been properly approved and everything is no longer maintained and is not approved.
That's where they would require temporary building permit, which goes with a demolition permit. So that's where, they're allowed to have it within that 188 days during the dry season, so there's not much of an impact with impervious surface, and then dismantle it at the end of the growing season with a follow-up inspection to see that it was properly dismantled.
Okay, so what are the consequences if they don't remove it, if they don't dismantle it?
They're in violation of their use permit or the new permit associated with the structure.
Right, so what are the consequences of that, of being in violation?
They could risk revocation of their use permit. We would,
Well, if they're
in fact,
done-
we're in the works with a handful that, we would bring it back to the planning commission for recommendation of revocation of use permit.
I guess maybe there's a question for Nicole. So if they're no longer in business, they don't really care if they don't have a use permit anymore. How do we handle that? Can we attach to the land, and do we have people who can go out and do this?
There are a number of code sections that relate to violations of county ordinances. And this particular one provided, there are 2 that would apply in this circumstance. There would be the permit itself and permit violations under Chapter 21 and the associated penalties that relate to that, which does include revocation of a permit. And then there's the nuisance code section, and the chapter number actually escapes me at the moment. But that addresses other nuisances, and it covers violations of various parts of the ordinance, and existing violations receive notice to abate, and then if the abatement isn't performed within a time frame, then the county would abate for them, and then the individual property owner or responsible parties would be billed, and if they don't pay that, then a lien would be placed on the property.
Okay,
And that's
what I wanted to
generally
hear.
how the process works.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in agriculture, we have something similar, although it hasn't been used for years and years, that if somebody's pear crop is a public nuisance by hosting pests, they can be abated and it's attached to their property. So that's what I wanted to hear.
If I could,
If I could also speak to staff resources, the demolition permit inspection is handled by our building division, and so we have no staff capacity issues regarding scheduling inspections for demolition permits. Thank you.
And just a, I guess it's more of like a comment or an observation. 10% of the total canopy area is divided by 5% for shipping containers or storage or dry shed, and I believe it was the other 5% for general purpose tent or storage dry shed as well. So you can't use all your 10% on shipping containers, because that would, you would have a bunch of shipping containers in one property. So you can only, is that correct? Is that kind of how I'm seeing this?
Maria, can you speak to that?
That makes sense to me. In fact, we could add, if there's consensus on the Planning Commission, to add a sentence of clarification so that the percentage of square footage for these accessory structures be cumulatively assessed and not exceed 10%. We can make that recommendation, or we can take that forward to the board.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that's how it's written on here, under, what is it, section 3, shipping containers for storage shed, letter F, it says 5%, total square footage of shipping containers is limited to 5% of their agricultural development, unless approved by the Ag Commissioner and the Community Development Director. And it also states that mechanical installations are prohibited except for odor control systems. And the same language is for the dry sheds as well, stating 5% of the agricultural development as well. And I just, to go back or to double check that they have to be on the no concrete or dirt is for any grading. The wording here states general purpose tent shall be on grade and must be on concrete or dirt or asphalt concrete. That we
I think we struck that.
Struck that and stated that it would be, yeah, and that just makes it an actual temporary structure. I think adding concrete just makes it more temporary. If that is the goal eventually, then once they apply for temporary or for permanent, then that would be an option for these storage sheds and shipping containers. And I guess the only thing that just really struck out to me between the conversation is obviously fire risks, but if you are within a boundary that's going to be well maintained, you're not going to have weeds and everything growing out near your generators. I'm sure any person that is willing to have generators, they have to know the risk, and so that'll be something you're not just going to put a shipping or a generator on a field on the ground somewhere. And we've spoken about noise control as well for the noise pollution, with having them covered, which would lower the risk of fire as well. So I kind of see how this was all drafted and how it all came together. But still, the noise concerns, and for neighbors, I mean, that's the main thing that I think was brought up by the commission, of having so many. How many are you allowed to have? One per shipping container or one per shed, and for how long? I don't think that was stated in the copy that we got here. How long you could run it, how many hours. So I think that has to be also written in here. Hours of operation, I guess, for generator use, so that it's not a 24/7 thing, or if it is, then what?
Article 27 defines hours of operation. So like in the instance that was brought up by a member of the public where they had lights running 24 hours and generators and fans, that project had egregious violations and was ultimately denied. So within the confines of the ordinance, there's already limitations on the hours of operation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If I may, Commissioners, Mr. Chair. So it sounds as if your concern is that there isn't a clear enough tie between applicable elements of other applicable elements that are relied upon in the ordinance for this change. So in essence, for example, in your reference to it being unclear in the proposed language here what the hours of operation are, then you might recommend to staff that they make a connection between this changed language by referencing
Article 27.
correct the part of Article 27 that applies in that instance. So there would be a citation in the language here that says as provided in, and then they would cite the applicable sections whenever they're relying on the parameters that exist in another part of the ordinance.
As a whole.
Yeah, because I'm not opposed, and I understand that this is a pathway to help these operations better, like, operate efficiently. And I see that, we want to bring in and make these changes that will help them, especially if these operations have already been approved. Like, we're not just giving them out.
Free-for-all?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a free-for-all thing. So they already have an operation going. They've maintained it, and obviously they've been visited by county officials and code enforcement to check. So I don't really see a problem with this. Just the noise concerns mainly, and fire risk, which it's a consensus with the public as well.
Well, and all of these projects are already 4290 and 4291 compliant, and that's how they were approved.
Yes. So.
And I also, I like the fact that it's in the footprint that's already been evaluated. Right. And, yeah, we all just kind of have to be, there has to be a little bit of compromise, a little bit of a segue to get the harvest product actually but beneficial and manufactured and hung and dried and all of that for the cultivators. Going back to what Jennifer said about, pear farmers, if you have nowhere to put your pears and your product, you're just growing for growing sake. Thank you. So, this will hopefully be beneficial to the ones that need it. And, yeah, I think we're all in pretty much a consensus on how we feel. And also going back to what council said about possibly making a reference to Article 27 as a whole and as an umbrella towards these discussed changes, I think would be great.
If I could just respond to the comment about I wasn't going to say anything, I didn't think it was really relevant, but in Lake County, most pears are not processed on site. They're actually shipped mine all out of the county for organic processing. We don't have any processing facilities in Lake County. We used to have a dry yard up on Bell Hill Road. We no longer do. There's only
Mariani's?
one. Yeah. There used to be, I think, 16, this is before my time, pear packing sheds in Lake County. There's now one.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's really relevant to refer to the pear industry in a similar way. I mean, yeah, we need places to park our tractors, but we don't need drying sheds, and we don't have people working in hoop houses. It's really a different ballgame altogether.
So I guess moving forward, be looking for, how do we make a motion to make these recommendations or to approve these recommendations with the changes that we've made today?
I'd personally like to see it go back to staff. Maria, what do you think of that?
Well, so far, thank you. I have a number of possible recommendations from the Planning Commission. If I may go over them and you can either agree or modify, that'd be great. The first one we have is the 100-foot setback for generators. The second one is removing concrete and asphaltic concrete for temporary structure surfaces. Then, let's see, the next one, I have that the 10% coverage for all the agricultural buildings that are referred to in this ordinance be a cumulative 10%, not a 10% per different type, but total square footage. And then lastly, add a citation or a reference of the citation for Article 27 as it applies to these structures.
Correct. And the generators and the noise mitigation, I believe, was the main concern on that one.
Mireya, if I may, I would recommend, this is Nicole, I would recommend that throughout the proposed ordinance language, if ever there is a section that relies on parameters that are provided in other parts of the ordinance, that you cite specifically those other sections in the area of the proposed language to which it applies.
Good. So a citation or reference of the Article 27 where appropriate. So throughout.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Okay. Good. Those are the recommendations that I have. So if County Council is amenable, we could accept a motion to adopt those recommendations as stated.
Yeah, I would just like to make one quick comment before we do that. I just wanted to express a little bit of disappointment in the Ag Advisory Committee. I did not feel like I got clear direction from them, and I know they spent a lot of time on it. There were a lot of meetings, but I wanted to hear more concrete motions or something from them. That's my only comment. I'm done.
Mr. Chair, I believe Mireya encapsulated our 4 conditions and issues accurately, and I would move that we forward those comments and recommendations onto the Board of Supervisors for their consideration.
I second that.
Seeing that we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
Commissioners,
None? Yes.
were you planning on recommending a CEQA review? I suspect, I haven't done the analysis myself. I suspect, though, with the proposed with the actions that maybe the types of changes that are being proposed or the actions being proposed under this ordinance as being allowable, that it may in fact be necessary to do a CEQA review for this ordinance, depending on the analysis of what is being permitted, what in fact
Yes.
is being permitted.
That was my understanding.
I have already referred this to our senior planner, our resource planner, for her review, and we will follow up with her recommendation as far as either taking it to the board, if possible, next week, or if she feels that an initial study is required, we will go ahead and get that done and request a continuance until we've completed that analysis.
So just so your commission is aware, should staff determine that a CEQA analysis is necessary for this ordinance, then it would have to come back to your commission for that.
Yeah, and I understand it would be the Board of Supervisors ultimately who makes that decision, and
The Board of Supervisors actually has delegated that responsibility to this planning commission.
oh,
So CEQA review, technically speaking, when your commission makes decisions, you are making 2 separate decisions. You are making a decision in relation to issuing a permit, and you are making a decision in relation to adopting a CEQA determination. They are 2 separate decisions, and some places do them separately. So within CEQA, there is within the Permit Streamlining Act, there is a time frame where if you adopt your CEQA first, then there's a time frame by which you have to approve the permit or deny the permit. So they are 2 separate decisions. Here, however, we do them at the same time. So in this case, however, the CEQA decision then, should there be one necessary for this ordinance, would come to you.
Okay.
In a notice to public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So if that, would that
So you may see it again.
would we have to do the motion again?
No, your requested motion is a separate decision in whether or not you are making recommendations to the board. However, their decision to adopt the ordinance could not move forward unless a CEQA review, if required, was performed.
Okay. So just to go back, we had all in favor and 0 oppositions for these recommendations, so the motion passes.
Excellent.
And we will be moving on to non-timed items. for department update.
Thank you. For department update, first I would like to introduce our new OA3, Ruby Mitz, is joining you today. We are very excited to have her join our team, and she is kind of our new Jim. So she'll be replacing Jim as the liaison with the Planning Commission. I would also like to extend sincere thanks to Trish Turner, who was very willing to cover for the new Jim, and she did a great job. So let's see, another piece of news. The posting for the Deputy Community Development Administrator closes this weekend. So I'm hoping that we'll have some awesome candidates to choose from to help me, basically, help me run the department, so I can stop dropping balls and making inappropriate public notice, hearing notices and things like that. So I'm really excited to get someone in that position. The bid documents or proposals for the general plan update and the associated documents, which are all the local area plan updates, is due, I think, either the 17th or the 24th. So we're moving forward on that one. And I just wanted to give the commission a brief update on cannabis permit processing. We have asked LACO to cease their permit processing for the remainder of the fiscal year. During that time period, we do now have seemed to have stabilized our staffing and our planners, and we have a very competent team of planners. And so we are taking the work that LACO had in progress and bringing it in-house. And Andrew and Mary are doing a great job of reaching out and training our planners. We've been working on a template that we feel is thorough and vetted, and will get you the information that you're going to need. And accuracy will remain a top priority as we go forward. So I'm pretty excited actually about what's going to start coming to you in the next few weeks as all these planners continue working on staff reports, initial studies, and just sort of increase the depth of their experience and their professional abilities, while still delivering you a timely, well-developed, vetted product. Let's see. I am going to pass it over to Andrew to give you more specifics on the numbers and the status of permits that we do have in the chute coming at you. Thank you. Andrew?
Yes. Well, we are looking at currently 109 pending projects. However, that number is a little bit misleading. You know, after we pulled these projects back in-house and reviewed it to where, you know, LACO has left off, our internal review has recognized 58 projects that are actively moving forward, and our staff will be focused on those 58 projects that are actively moving forward. We are sitting on a large number right now. We have 46 identified that are incomplete. They've been incomplete for well over a year in most cases. We haven't heard from the applicants in quite a long time. A handful of them, we understand they're bankrupt, or they pulled out, or they moved elsewhere. So you'll be seeing a handful of denial without prejudice recommendations as we move forward. I think we're getting the first of many noticed. So some of them have even been deemed complete. However, they're in the CEQA review, and the applications don't have the adequate information to complete an initial study, or they're missing some of the reports that were required during their permit process, such as hydrology reports. Yeah, essentially, we are going to close them out. Our ordinance doesn't currently have any mechanism to close these out, so we're going to bring them forward. So, and hopefully the task force can help us develop a mechanism to close projects out when they fall into this category. So.
And that concludes our department update for today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
All right, thank you guys
Thank you, everybody.
sticking around this great meeting. So I'll be adjourning the meeting at 11:14.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish.